and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, your serving of drinks culture and the people who drive it. I'm JC Tops. This week, we're taking a look at wine education. Certification programs can be a really great experience for those who want to learn more about wine. Speaking of, here at Wine Enthusiast, we offer our own certification program. However, in an effort to make wine more accessible, the wine community has been questioning traditional education programs as they currently are. Are certification programs creating barriers in the industry? Will expanding how we view education remove some of those barriers? I sat down with Layla Schlack and Larissa Dubose to discuss the wine education landscape. Layla is an award-winning writer and editor, and Larissa is a certified sommelier and wine educator. So listen on as we examine the relevancy of certification programs, why expanding education can lead to diverse perspectives, especially in wine media, and how certification programs could be contributing to the elitist, oftentimes problematic language surrounding wine. Every glass of wine tells a story. These stories reveal hidden histories, flavors, and passions, and sometimes they unravel our darkest desires. In Wine Enthusiast's newest podcast, Vinfamous, journalist Ashley Smith dissects the underbelly of the wine world. We hear from the people who know what it means when the products of love and care become the source of greed, arson, and even murder. Each episode takes listeners into the mysterious and historic world of winemaking and the crimes that have since become vinfamous. This podcast pairs well with wine lovers, history nerds, and crime junkies alike. So, grab a glass of your favorite wine and follow the podcast to join us as we delve into the twists and turns behind the all-time most shocking wine crimes. Follow Vinfamous on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and be sure to follow the show so you never miss a scandal. New episodes drop every other Wednesday. Hello, I'm JC Tops. My first guest today is Layla Schlack. An award-winning writer and editor, Layla is an editor at Whetstone Media and wine reviewer and writer-at-large here at Wine Enthusiasts. Before working at Whetstone, she worked here as managing print editor. Welcome, Layla. I'm so happy to have you today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So this isn't your first appearance on the Wine Enthusiast podcast, but for newer listeners, can you tell us a little bit about your wine journey and how you got into wine?
Sure. I actually was not trying to get into wine. I've been editing magazines for about 15 years, and I've done travel magazines and I've done food magazines. And I was applying for jobs and Wine Enthusiast came up. And I always liked wine and I was kind of an adventurous drinker. And I kind of ended up being the default person who would pick a bottle for the table when I went out for dinner, that sort of thing. But I had no formal education and kind of limited informal education. But because Wine Enthusiast also covers travel and food, and because I had all of this print magazine experience, they took a chance on me. And so I came in, editing those topics that I knew better. And obviously through working on the magazine, I learned a lot just from being in the office. But then I also did some WSET training as well.
Okay. I'm actually that person at the dinner table too, where everyone wants like, oh, well, who's going to order the bottle of wine? It's going to be JC.
Right.
So you do have some certification.
I have passed levels 1 and 2 of WSET, and I completed the coursework for level 3 and then just kind of haven't gotten around to completing the exam, which is terrible. And I guess I probably should, but on the other hand, I don't have plans to pursue a WSET diploma. So to me, I feel like I got what I needed from the course by learning the coursework, and I still have those materials, and I'm less concerned about the certification than the knowledge.
Okay. So why did you decide to pursue certification in the beginning?
So I think when you're new to the wine world, like I would go to events and dinners and things, and people would assume that I knew a lot about wine. And for me, the more I learn about wine, the more I feel like, well, I'll never know everything. There's just a lot to know and it's changing a lot. But I wanted some formal education so that when I was in those situations, I would know the language and I would just feel a little bit more confident being parts of conversations with people who were MWs and MSs and had further certification and deeper knowledge than I did. I think with any sort of niche interest, learning the vocabulary can take you a long way in terms of kind of feeling confident and feeling like you belong there.
Okay. So you were actually questioned about your credentials when you would go to these events?
I wasn't questioned about my credentials so much as that it would just be kind of in the course of conversation, people would be talking about wine and winemaking and regions and bottles and vintages. And I didn't feel like I had anything to contribute. I was nervous that somebody would ask me a question that I couldn't answer. Like this was all kind of informal dinner table sort of stuff. It wasn't like anyone was grilling me. It was much more, again, just about wanting to feel confident in my place there and be able to be a part of those conversations and being able to, you know, share a little tidbit of information about that sub appellation that everyone's talking about right now.
So, just for a little background for our, for the listeners, I wanted to talk to Layla for a media and editorial perspective because, it's through food and beverage media that consumers become familiar with wine language and pairings and trends and are introduced to producers. So wine media wields a lot of power. And so I just had some questions and I wanted to kind of delve deeper into wine certification in media. So, Layla, do you think that when it comes, like you've worked as an editor and you've commissioned pieces to freelance writers, there are people who are formally trained, who are certified, and people who aren't formally trained. Do you think that matters, or should it matter, or did it matter when you commission pieces?
I will say that when I commissioned a piece, I was not asking any writers if they had training or what their certification level was. You know, some people put it in their email signature, but beyond that, and some people would come up when I Googled them, but beyond that, it wasn't particularly something I was screening for. I was much more interested in the story ideas they were pitching, but kind of philosophically speaking, I think it's super important to have a mix. Like, I definitely felt before I had any sort of formal wine training that I was an asset as an enthusiast who did not have the training because I could say, hey, maybe we should define this term in this story because I don't know it. And I think it's important to think about who your readership is and to have editorial contributors who sort of mirror that. So in Wine Enthusiast, a lot of the times we're speaking to the trade and we're speaking to people who know a lot. And so we don't want to do any stories that are going to seem overly simple to them, that are going to seem overly obvious to them. On the other hand, we do have a lot of readers who are just starting to learn about wine, even casually, even to become the person who orders for the table. And we don't want to intimidate them either. So and then there's a whole range in between there. And so I think the best way to kind of speak to all of those readers is to have also contributors who fall along that spectrum, contributors who are just learning about wine and stumble upon a great story or have some, related area of expertise like food or like agriculture, like travel, as well as people who are deeply entrenched in the wine world, know all the players, know all the terms, can get really granular and geeky if we need them to, and then a range in between as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so, do you feel that that's the same as far as the actual editorial staff, who a publication is hiring, who is sitting at the table and making decisions?
I kind of do. Yeah. I think that when you're in a room with everyone who has the same sort of education level, it's very easy for those folks to lose sight of what questions someone might have who just, stops into their local big box store once or twice a month to pick up a bottle for friends and doesn't want to pick up something bad. Like, I think the editorial staff for sure should kind of reflect. I mean, the editorial staff should know wine for sure, more so than maybe freelancers need to, and certainly more so than readers need to. But they shouldn't be so entrenched. The entire staff shouldn't be so entrenched that they lose sight of those more casual readers or those newer readers and what questions they might have and what information they might find useful.
Yeah, I agree. And my personal background is I was a bartender at high-end hotels for like over a decade. So I am not certified in wine, but I do know the language and I do have the confidence in having conversations at events. But I'm always asked when I go to events, or tastings or trainings, well, what is your background? What are your credentials? Who made you the expert? And then I explain to them what my training is, but that's still not good enough for them. It's like, well, I think you should check out, this training. And I'm like, well, I've already had my training.
Right.
And I just kind of feel like why is my training considered less than as opposed to someone who's certified? I don't think that's right. And I think that's where wine becomes too exclusive
Yeah.
and exclusionary.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would argue that, in fact, that although you don't have certification, you have, again, that kind of finger on the pulse of like, how are people drinking? What are they looking for? What questions were they asking you? And that's really, really valuable in informing the stories that you both write and edit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like I had to sell these bottles to consumers. So it's a very different. I mean, consumers aren't really interested in soil composition. They're interested in what's going to pair with their food. And I think that, you know, but I'm never at that point where I'm like, well, this training doesn't mean anything. I think that's just it's the wine industry has a long way to go as far as like accepting other forms of training.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that something happens with wine specifically where sometimes when people are just very enthusiastic, they don't really know how to express that without turning it into like kind of throwing facts at you and quizzing you because they're just excited to talk about it. And obviously that's not what's happening all the time. There is still a fair amount of elitism in the wine industry. And certainly for both of us as women, for you as a Black woman, like there are definitely settings in the wine world where we're going to be either taken less seriously or ignored completely. I actually prefer the latter if I have to choose. But and I don't know actually that education would fix that. I wonder if, if you said, yes, actually, I have a WSET diploma, would those people say, well, then why didn't you go after an MW? Like, I don't
Right.
know
Yeah.
how much of it is about the training and how much of it is just about kind of moving goalposts.
Yeah, yeah, I kind of agree with that as well. Because I mean, also like now I'm going to wine trips and I'm going to dinners and these are kind of glamorous dinners and lunches, but the point of these are training. I'm training on the job.
Right.
So I'm learning new things every day. So I think that is a form of education as well.
Very much so. Yeah. And again, to go back to those readers and those consumers who are newer to wine, a lot of them, their first contact with any sort of wine education is going to be something like an in store tasting. So, again, when you're having these experiences where you're tasting with someone in the trade, rather than sitting in a classroom, that's going to more closely mirror your reader's experience.
Right. And I do want to kind of get away from, the idea that formal education is the default. Because, I mean, formal education in this country has been a privilege, especially to people of color. And I think that when you start saying it's the default or that's the must or requirement, then that's a very slippery slope. I feel like that's gatekeeping in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not reasonable to expect every single person who's interested in the wine industry to pay for those education programs out of pocket. It's not usually a situation where somebody's saying, oh, well, I can get my MS instead of my bachelor's degree, right? Like, it's not like these are technical schools where you're asking people to put up money that's going to kind of set them up for life. This is fundamentally asking people to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars for yes, something related to their career in a lot of cases, although I would argue that in those cases it should be their employers paying for the education, which was the case for me. Wine Enthusiast did pay for the WSET training that I received. But if somebody's a freelance writer, if somebody is writing newsletters, if somebody is, pouring demos, if anywhere in between, like I don't think it's reasonable to say, well, why didn't you devote this many hours and this much money to this program?
Yeah. I really I want for this industry for it not to matter, or I want basically for any industry, including this industry, where certifications or degrees aren't attached to your value. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what boils my blood about the whole thing. It's like it's certifications and degrees, in this industry and other industries, kind of it's attached to your value, and I don't think that's right. I think there's a lot more that, than a certification, which is great to have if that's what you want, but you can offer a lot more to the industry than that.
Yeah, and I think that the type of education that you are doing, that I did do and still do sometimes with these tastings and master classes, I don't think that's lesser than. Like I think saying that, these formal certificate and diploma programs are the only way is kind of like saying, it's not like saying everyone needs a college degree even. It's saying everyone needs to be an English major, right? Because they're structured in a very specific way. So you come away understanding wine in a very specific way that's different than you do if you have a service background, if you have a hobby background, like if you're someone who's looking at wine more from the perspective of what tastes good to me and will taste good with this dinner I'm making tonight.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think both are valuable. We need both.
absolutely. Yeah.
Both are valuable and both bring perspective. It's just that only one is valued more, and I think that that's the wrong perspective, and that's the wrong point of view.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's disappointing that that's kind of still the case. I think the wine industry obviously still has a long ways to go, but I started at Wine Enthusiast in 2016. In those 7 years, I've seen some pretty big shifts in, who gets attention, who in the national media, who's kind of welcomed into the wine world in terms of representation. But there is still this baseline of you need to demonstrate a level of seriousness. You need to demonstrate that you can afford to be here. Like the education taps into all of those things. It's saying I'm someone who, again, could spend all this money and could dedicate all this time to learning the soil type of every cru in Burgundy, and and I would love to learn the soil type of every cru in Burgundy. I'm not knocking that at all, but well, first of all, I personally would have trouble retaining it, and second, it's not something that has ever been manageable for me in terms of my time, even if I could get financial support for it.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, it's super time consuming.
Yeah.
So, as you're also a wine reviewer for Wine Enthusiast, and has your certification training come in handy when it comes to reviewing wines?
I will say that this is both from WSET and again just from working at Wine Enthusiast, that the biggest revelation to me about wine reviewing and quality assessment is it's so much based on structure. And so I think just kind of learning, deductive tasting and how to talk about things like texture and structure to a wine have been enormously helpful in terms of writing reviews. That said, I think a lot of people still just want to know, like, does it taste like cherries or strawberries? Like, I think that my background in food has been maybe equally important because I can talk about flavors and I can imagine what flavors will pair well together. And so usually when I'm tasting wine, the first place my brain goes is what would this pair with? And that does involve both, texture, structure stuff and tasting flavor notes that are present. And so it's mostly right, like the formal training and also just kind of being immersed in wine enthusiast is just that reminder to say, like, when you're assessing quality, remember to bear in mind these structural components like body and length and intensity and complexity and all of this. And not just talk about, what you want to drink this wine with.
Right. Yeah. 100%. One final question, Layla. When you're relaxing, what's in your glass? What are you drinking these days?
Oh gosh, with most things I kind of change it up all the time. But I'm a cool climate sort of drinker. I drink a lot of Alsace Riesling, of course. And while we are in this sort of shoulder season allergy time of year for me, I'm drinking a fair amount of bubbles. I'm drinking some Cremant Alsace and then just some kind of funky pet nats because I find that bubbles help clear up my allergies, which is completely unscientific and definitely
I was going to say, you should put that into a review. That's awesome. Layla, thank you so much for joining us and talking with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was great talking to you.
You're invited to a unique opportunity to travel through South America without ever leaving New York City. Join Wine Enthusiast on Thursday, May 4th, 2023, in the Georgia Room at the Freehand Hotel for an exclusive wine tasting event with authentic food and live music. You'll have the chance to taste wines from nearly 50 of the best wineries in South America, all serving 90-plus point wines. Explore the flavors of Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, and beyond in one unforgettable evening. Don't miss out on this incredible experience. Book your tickets now and get ready to savor the flavors of South America. Use promo code WEPODCAST20, WEPODCAST20, to get $20 off at wineenthusiastsipevents.com. Hi, welcome back to our discussion about wine certification programs. My next guest is Larissa Dubose. Larissa is the National Director of Beverages for Paradis Lagardère. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did.
In the dining division, as well as the founder and the resident wine educator of the Lotus and the Vines. She's also one of Wine Enthusiast's 2022's Future 40 Tastemakers. Welcome, Larissa. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So, a little background. I would love to hear about your wine journey. How did you get into wine professionally?
So, when we were talking about this conversation, I'm like, there's just so many layers, the layers and the layers, right? I got into this industry, ironically, it was around this time 13 years ago. So I will tell you that today is actually the anniversary of my mom's heavenly entrance. And it was maybe about a week prior that I found out that I got the job to be an on-premise sales representative. And I remember that being the last time that she was really, truly engaged with us. She had breast cancer and it had continued to get worse. And so at that point, we knew that we didn't have a ton of time. But when I got the job offer, I remember we were all in the car and we were all like, yay! And she passed away a few days later. And I know that she passed away a few days later now because she knew I was going to be okay. My mom was a fighter and she did everything she wanted to do up until her very last breath. And so I'm very excited. I thought it was very apropos to have a conversation like this with you today on her anniversary. So I got into this industry at a very dark space in my life. I was literally trying to figure out how I was going to make it through without my mother, my best friend, my confidant, my everything. And this industry embraced me. When I originally started in the industry, this was back in 2010, I was on premise and working in PG County, which is outside of the Washington, D.C. area. And at that point, I was dealing with more spirits in what we will call house wine accounts. And so
Mhm.
from there, I eventually, started to learn more. This is actually where my wine education journey began. It began, honestly, working with the distributor that if you chose to, they would really invest in your wine education. And so it started there. Fast forward to 2012, I had an incentive trip that allowed us to go to Napa and Sonoma for the first time. And that was when I officially got the wine bug. The stuff that I had been reading about in the books and the pictures and everything in between, I finally got to put boots on the ground and experience it and see it. And I remember there was this moment at a winery, and we climbed up this hill. And it was at the top of the hill that you could see the Russian River meandering through the property. And it was just this glorious moment. And I shed what we call a glory tear. You know what the glory
Oh,
tear is? That one
yes.
tear. I was like, this is
Yeah.
a work trip. Let me not ugly cry in front of all these, my colleagues. But I just had this moment where it all came together. And I remember thinking, your mom's really proud of you right now, Riss, And so I knew at that point, I didn't know what wine was going to be in my career, but I knew that it was going to be a significant point in my career at some point. And that's really how it started. So 2012 is when I had that aha moment. And then fast forward, my husband and I moved to Atlanta in 2014. That's how I got onto the supplier side of the business, working for a Napa Valley wine company as a sales manager, regional sales manager. And I pretty much stayed in that space of the supplier, regional sales manager space up until my new role that will be a year next month with Parodies Lagardère as their national beverage director. So I went from the outside and came back in. I did the reverse.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on the year, and thank you so much for sharing that story with us. I know that's really hard to talk about sometimes,
Yeah.
but that's an amazing story.
I feel good about it. We gonna stay strong.
So, so you are certified. Can you tell us what exactly are your certifications in wine?
Okay. So start out with my first major certification, I'll say. I had some certifications through the distributor that I worked with in Maryland, but unfortunately at the time they just didn't have the more global credibility, if you will. So my
Mhm.
first globally recognized certification is through the Society of Wine Educators. That's the Certified Specialist of Wine. I am level 3 with the Wine Spirits Education Trust. I am a certified sommelier through the Court of Master Sommeliers, and through the Wine Scholar Guild, I completed their master level for champagne.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Um, so how are your experiences in these programs? I mean, like, why did you choose to become certified? Or was it a choice? Was that something that you chose, or was it employer mandated? How does that work?
It was something I chose. And this is one of those layered questions because each different certification pulled something out of me, triggered, challenging, whatever the case might be, right? These exams were not necessarily easy, but I learned something about myself each time. And I really learned to get out of my own way, right? Imposter syndrome is something that I work through daily. And I am hell bent on ensuring that my daughter, who's 7, will not work through the same things that I work through on a day to day. And I will say that there were times during my different courses where that imposter syndrome would light up a bit. And I've come to learn that imposter syndrome is not necessarily a me thing. It's somebody that never knew or expected to see someone that looked like me walk in a room and show knowledge and show, whatever is needed that they just didn't expect. They project something on me. They have to ask
Mhm.
that super duper hard question, that aha, that actually moment, right? And that's a projection and it's a reflection on them. But the way that I'm built, I always internalized it, right? And so there were definitely pockets of time where going through these different certifications would allow that imposter syndrome to flare up. So that being said, I chose this life. It wasn't a corporate mandate. I chose violence. you know, like I went through WSET level 3 and certified the same year. I don't know. I chose violence that year as a newer mom and everything in between, a wife and a professional, everything that was going on that year. I chose to do that, but I did it because I had a goal in mind. Specifically going back to 2017, it really dawned on me that when I'm looking around the room, when we go to these trade shows, these tastings, these wine events, when at the time when I was, leading wine dinners and going to these fancy schmancy country clubs, I kept realizing that I'm the only one in the room and I didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted there to be more people that looked like me in the room. So in 2017, I remember having several conversations with some Black wine professionals, and I likened what I felt like I saw in the future. I'm like, there's a wave happening with wine and wine etiquette and wine knowledge. And I likened it to like the travel noir movement, right? Now, Instagram, social media, everybody's traveling and posting their content, right? It's a huge wave. You didn't see a ton of that specifically with Black wine professionals in the wine world. And I figured, well, why can't I start talking about wine and just sharing the little bit that I know to be able to give those little, snippets and quips and clues to help more people that look like me feel comfortable. And so in that realization, I said, well, I got to study to show myself approved. I can't be out here just speaking foolishness and craziness because wine is factual. You can really say a lot of things that are wrong and mislead people. And I never wanted to do that. So that's why for me, the certifications were really, really important. The certifications were going to help me as a professional because when I came to Atlanta and I went to the supplier side of the business, I realized I'm like, well, if I'm supposed to be the professional that knows about these wines and these regions, I got to up my game a bit. And so that's what really led me to go after certified specialist of wine, because when I moved to Atlanta, that was the certification that I saw with the distributor that I worked with. So as a supplier, we work with distributor managers, sales reps, the like, and we go on what we call ride wits. And so I would be the one that would get in the car with the sales rep, obviously pre-COVID, and we would go from account to account. And I would be the one to really do a deeper dive into the wines in my portfolio than what the sales representative would normally do on a day-to-day.
Okay.
And I realized that, you know what, this will make me a more credible sales professional. But ultimately, for the Lotus and the Vines and the platform that I was building, I wanted to be able to ensure that whatever I was putting out there was factual and that I was really helping people and not misleading them. And so fast forward from 2015 to 2017, that's when I'm like, well, what else is out there? So I really started to look into Wine Spirit Education Trust. I started to look into the Court of Master Sommeliers just to see what those look like and what particular paths, of study that was. And, my crazy self decided, well, let me just try both and see which one fits, right? The Court of Master Sommeliers is very theory driven, is very service driven. Of course, you have to have the theory and the tasting as well. Whereas WSET tends to be more theory driven. And so at some point during level 2 in the intro course for certified, WSET level 2 in the intro course for certified, I realized that, well, if I'm going to do WSET level 3, my theory will be on point for if I decide to go after certified for the Court of Master Sommeliers. So that's how I wound up doing two pretty significant certifications within a year. And that's really what the background of it was. Like for my Lotus and the Vines platform, wanted to make sure that I was giving plenty of good quality information. And then from a professional side, I wanted to make sure that if I'm going to be going into an account, I want to speak like I know what I'm talking about. I want to speak with confidence and I want to speak factually. And so that was the catalyst for me really going after my wine certifications.
Wow. Kudos to you.
Not for the faint of heart, I'll tell you that.
My attention span cannot handle that.
I give all the appreciation to my family. They truly, truly hold me down and support me with all my crazy ideas and yeah, doing all of that in 2018 was, a lot.
Well, I mean, and I like what you said about imposter syndrome, like that really
Mm,
does affect and impact everybody in every industry, not just wine, right? I mean, journalism, like everything. So,
yeah.
formal education and training really does have a place in the wine industry. It can be a
Hmm.
great thing. Like you said, there are factual things, right? There are things to learn, wine regions and grapes and soil composition and fermentation. But I think there's been a lot of conversation as far as formal training and not being so inclusive. And I
Mm,
think
hmm.
that's been in kind of in conjunction with language and
Yeah.
how and the language that is taught in formal training. Is there exclusionary language in wine? Do you feel there's exclusionary language in wine?
I don't know if I'd say exclusionary. I just say that it needs to broaden, right?
Okay.
So, look at it from this perspective. Like when we talk about from in a flavor profile for Cabernet Sauvignon, right? So, black fruits are typically where we're going to go when we're talking about Cabernet, when we're talking about the fruit components of a wine. So, that being said, blackberry, black cherry, blue fruits, all those things, those most individuals should have at some point in life experienced those, right?
Right.
So that's necessary from a factual stance. I think where the area of opportunity is when it comes to the current curriculums that are out there is that we need to begin expanding that vocabulary, right? So, if I smell something and I think about sorrel, which is, a Caribbean drink that is made from hibiscus, the hibiscus flower. Am I
Mhm.
wrong? I'm not
No.
wrong, right?
No,
But
exactly.
that's not on a grid. However, there are other fruits that I can get from that as well that are more, I guess, kind of cross the gamut. So really what it comes to for me, the key is really expanding the vocabulary. And from the understanding, like I joked about this last year on social media. Yeah, I just had a gooseberry, honestly, like 2-3 months ago for the first time. Gooseberry is a term, is a fruit that I just didn't grow up around, and many people in my culture and in my circle of the world just weren't exposed to gooseberry. But that's such a signature aroma and note when it comes to Sauvignon Blanc. So what did I do? I ordered gooseberry extract off of Amazon. So I'm like, if I've never had a gooseberry, let me at least smell it. So if I'm going to use it, I'm not using it in the wrong context, right? Like, girl, there's no gooseberry in this wine. What are you talking about? You've never even had one. So I don't know the last time I've had a currant. But these are terms and notes and flavors and aromas that are, a part of grids. And so I think that there's a great opportunity to really begin to expand to expand those descriptors so that it is more inclusive to individuals that come from not Eurocentric parts of the world. So that's really what it is for me.
That's so right on. That's so right on. Forest floor. I absolutely hate it. So, like as a reviewer for my, for wine enthusiast myself, I just, I understand that these reviews are for consumers. Like when a consumer walks in and they see a rating, great, okay, and they read the review, who wants to hear that their wine smells like forest floor? And even if
Uh-huh.
there's, like even if that may be a positive thing to the everyday consumer, that's not it's like, let me pair my meatloaf with forest floor. I don't understand why that's even a thing. So
So,
even
okay,
if
from that perspective, I totally get it. Yes. That's exclusionary. You're not making me want to try this as an everyday consumer. Yes.
like you smell that and as a reviewer, and I'm not saying they don't, because there are lots of, like it's very subjective. But
Right.
why would you write that? Because it's a review is supposed to be for a consumer.
Yeah.
So I just I'm I was confused by that when I read certain reviews. No offense to anybody who's written that
Right. Like
descriptor
instead
down,
of
sorry.
forest floor, like maybe like a wet fall day, right? When you walk outside and those
Yeah.
leaves are starting to really start to break down and it's a fresh rain. And so you have that kind of that mustiness.
That's more approachable, and I think that's what we are, like, we're laughing and we're joking about it, but I feel like
I'm cracking
it's
up.
supposed to be it's supposed to be approachable, and I think that's
Yes.
what the industry is missing, the
Mm,
accessibility and the approachability that comes in language.
absolutely.
So that's just my opinion.
I'm right there with you. It's hilarious. But yeah, that makes sense to me.
Well, I mean, so as people in wine, are these conversations started in the training programs? Like, how do we get to the point where these training programs are listening to us and are expanding language in wine and are making wine more approachable?
That's another great question. There's a few things that come around it, right? So when we think about certifications and as a wine professional and if they're necessary, right? So they're not unless you have tenure. If you have tenure in this industry, then you can completely be a knowledgeable and know a lot wine professional and successful in this industry. This is the issue and this is where the area of opportunity is and the gap is. When we're looking at it from a the newcomers and our BIPOC community, many individuals are just now getting are seeing interest because there's representation that wasn't there before. You can't be what you can't see is what we say all the time, right? So wow, I saw this individual, whether it was on social media, this article I read, whatever, or I saw them on TV, on the news. Wow, I didn't even realize this was a space that I could exist and thrive in. How do I get started? It's very hard to be new in the industry without a certification, right? And so there is an interesting dynamic there when it comes to there's an again layers, all the layers to this, right? So
Mhm.
when it comes to the training and the curriculums, at some point they are going to have to listen because the room is changing. And as the room changes, those voices are going to speak up because they have to and because they should, right? And so, but this is also a ship, and ships don't turn very quickly. Ships move very slowly. So I know that there are organizations that are, doing the work to, if nothing else, like increase the diversity within their curriculums and their organizations. And then from there, that's when you really start to have these authentic conversations about changing the narrative when it comes to wine language. And so then you have the other side of you have these communities that are popping up all over the country, right? Where we're getting together as BIPOC individuals and we're creating that language together, right? And so because this is a newer thought process, whereas before it was always, well, this is the wine language, this is what it is. It just is what it is. Now, these communities are coming up all over the place that are saying, well, if we're all together in one accord and we're smelling these wines, we're tasting these wines, and what we're sharing is factual because it's coming from our experiences. And now you have strength in numbers because you have I would have never got that note when I'm smelling a wine and I see you across the table throwing a note out there that I would have never even turned on had you not said it, but you just unlocked a core memory for me. We know that this is something that's real. And so these communities now begin to come into these certifications and take these certifications. From there, that conversation again is introduced. And it's there's no end all be all answer, but I know that the work is beginning and I know that there's so much more to be done. But I'll be really honest and say I don't see this being like a something that'll happen within the next year or two, right? This is a ongoing conversation that will take some time. And I actually the virtue of patience is something that I pray for every day. I think what keeps me motivated is that no, I don't see the shift yet when it comes to certifications changing the notes and that are necessary for to qualify to get a point for a wine tasting. However, I genuinely believe that the work that we're all trying to do right now will by the time my daughter is of legal drinking age, and this won't even be a conversation, right? So that's what keeps me motivated. I definitely don't want it to be that many years before we see significant change, but I do believe that by the time she's of legal age to drink, that the change will have come.
I love your optimism. It's wonderful.
I'm trying. She's the one. With that, that's being very honest. She's the one. She's the one that I do this for. I mean, you can look at the last 3 years, the last 3 crazy years, and while we've seen a lot of strides in our industry, there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of gaps. There's still a lot of disparity. And it's really frustrating. It's really easy to get weary and well doing. But I look at her and I know that this work will pay off. That I know that it's beyond optimism. It's radical. It's radical hope. Like, I believe it with my whole heart and being.
So as far as, like, there are some restaurants and publications and other companies in wine where certifications are required, or like they highly want you to
Mhm.
be certified. How do you feel about that? I mean, like, what if you are trained in wine other ways? Me personally, I spent 10 years behind a bar selling wine to consumers. So I'm not certified, but that I feel like that doesn't mean that my training is less than, but I know there are many in the industry that do. So how do you feel about requiring certifications?
Requiring it is a slippery slope because it's like you said, and I mentioned it earlier, you do not have to have certifications to be a successful wine professional. You have to have the tenure, right? To get the big job, the tenure has to be there, right? I know individuals without wine certifications that could talk me under the table when it comes to wine, right?
Right, right,
So the other side of that is, if you're going to require that I have some type of certification to get in the door, then the expectation is that you should be covering my desire to continue my education, right? So many companies, won't cover your certifications, even if, even though, excuse me, you desiring to learn more, you desiring to, up your knowledge level makes you a better professional, and they benefit from that, right? So there's two sides of it. I don't like the whole idea of requirement. The requirement thing is, it's a slippery slope, and you open yourself up to a lot of side eye, honestly. The reality is there are a lot of professionals out there that don't have a certification, don't need a certification, and will do amazing things. The other side of it is, like I said before, for somebody that's newer in the industry, that's where those certifications are helpful, because if you didn't have 10 years selling wine to somebody, then you have to have something as a foundation. And that's
right.
kind of this weird balance that we have happening right now, because there is an influx of individuals that want to get into the wine space, but you have to have some type of foundation in order to get into the door, right? Unless you really want to start from the ground up and get tenure, but tenure takes time. So
Yeah,
it's like, do you
yeah,
want to ramp up real quick? Wine certification will help you ramp up. The tenure, it's there, it's available, but it's going to take time.
yeah. I agree with that. I think that there's many different ways to be trained. And I
Yeah.
think that, certifications take money, and it's also time consuming. And,
Hmm.
what happens if you decided that you wanted to be in wine at 40? You have a family, I mean, so a lot of people don't have time or the money to go into formal certification. Does that mean they don't deserve to be in wine if they've had training as a server? Or, so I think that's, like you said, it's a slippery slope, and I agree. It's a very slippery slope.
So slippery.
So I just have one final question for you.
Sure.
When you decide to sit down after a hard day's work
Mm.
and open a bottle, what's in your glass? What are you drinking?
More than likely, it's something bubbly. Sparkling wine, champagne is my love language. I definitely would drink champagne every day if my budget allowed that. However, you and I both know that there are amazing sparkling wines from all over the world that fit the bill. just as well. And so, yeah, I believe that bubbles should be enjoyed anytime. A good day, a bad day, a no day, an in-between day. You should celebrate. You should celebrate. Life is short, life is short. Celebrate. You deserve. There's a song that lives in my head, rent free, called I Deserve. And I sing it in my head a lot. But it's usually going to be bubbles. If it's not bubbles, it'll more than likely be a rosé. My everyday drinking wine is, light, easy drinking, not too much thought that has to go into it. I just want something that's porch pounder is such an overused term at this point, but I hang out with the patio sippers and the porch pounders after a long day.
On that note, Larissa, thank you so much for joining us. It was
Thank
such a
you.
pleasure talking to you.
Oh, I'm so happy to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all that you do. And I can't wait to see you in person one day. And hopefully,
I know.
And hug you. I'm going to hug you real good. I just want you to know that.
Well, I grew up in Atlanta, so I definitely have to get back to Atlanta soon.
Let me know. Awesome. Thank you so much, my dear. I'll talk to you soon.
Wine certification programs do have their place within the educational landscape. However, given that the current vocabulary curriculum is rooted in Eurocentric language, maybe it's time the industry stop thinking those programs are the only way to learn about wine. As the wine community continues to grow and become more diverse, so should the educational landscape. What are your thoughts? If you liked today's episode, we'd love to read your reviews and hear what you think. And hey, why not tell your wine-loving friends to check us out too? Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. You can also go to winemag.com/podcast for more episodes and transcripts. I'm JC Tops. Thanks for listening.